And then let's look at the Panama Canal. Remember Trump's 2025 inauguration when he looked at the world and he said, China's operating the Panama Canal. We gave it to Panama and we're taking it back. And he spent the following year calling the 1977 handover a rip-off deal where Jimmy Carter gave away control of the canal that America built for essentially nothing. So let's look at the backdrop real quick. The Panama Canal is a 50-mile stretch of water that connects the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, and it is the jugular of the American economy. 40% of all U.S. containers move through that canal every year, and over 70% of everything that transits through that canal is either coming from or going to an American port. Every ship carrying electronics, cars, food, oil, military supplies has to pass through two gates there. Balboa on the Pacific side and Cristobal on the Atlantic side. For 25 years, both of those gates were controlled by a Chinese-linked company called C.K. Hutchinson. Washington called it normal international commerce, and Trump, of course, called it a security threat. But here's why. Hong Kong, despite having its own government on paper, operates under a Chinese Communist Party that's made one thing legally explicit. In a national security situation, Chinese companies, they comply with Beijing. So the operators sitting at both ends of America's most critical shipping lane, they weren't neutral. This was not a neutral business. It was a company that if Beijing made a phone call, they'd have to pick up. And think about what that actually means. C.K. Hutchinson controlled the cranes that load and unload every ship, the scanning systems that check what's inside every container, the computer systems and the data, which means they know exactly what's moving through and where it's going and who it belongs to. So that's not commerce. That's operational intelligence in the hands of a foreign adversary. And it's worse than surveillance. It's a kill switch, because if Beijing ever wanted to strangle 40% of American trade without firing a single shot, they don't need a navy. They need a software glitch and a phone call. So, of course, Trump moved swiftly and aggressively to end it. And here's the timeline. So it's January 2025. Trump's inaugurated, and he publicly declares China's running the canal. That same day, Panama's Comptroller General, who has his own issues and reasons to be angry with China, launches a formal audit of C.K. Hutchinson's port operations. And it turns out that C.K. Hutchinson had gone about 20 years without paying Panama meaningful concession fees. So Panama's own citizens knew they were being shortchanged. And it's likely that U.S. pressure gave them the political cover to act on a grievance that they've been sitting on for years. Now, at the same time, throughout 2025, the Trump administration applied pressure on every front simultaneously, which we all watch, right? Marco Rubio travels to Panama City, and he makes it clear that favorable U.S. trade policy depends on removing Chinese-linked operators from the ports. So the head of the Federal Maritime Commission announces publicly that the U.S. can issue massive daily fines and bar Panamanian ships from American ports. Trump, of course, in Trump fashion, refuses to rule out military force, invoking a 1977 treaty that gives the U.S. the right to intervene if the canal's neutrality is threatened. Well, Panama's a small country, guys, okay? So an entire country whose economy runs on trade does not take that as an abstract threat. Meanwhile, C.K. Hutchinson is reading the room. So they try to cut their losses. They try to sell their global port assets to a Western consortium led by BlackRock for $23 billion. They want a clean exit, right? But Beijing immediately intervenes. They block the deal and they demand that a Chinese state-owned shipping company receive a controlling stake before they're willing to approve anything. Now, okay, this moment should tell you everything you need to know. A private Hong Kong company tried to sell its own assets, and the Chinese government stepped in to stop it. Well, now it's January of 2026, and Panama's Supreme Court rules that C.K. Hutchinson's contracts that they held for about 30 years are unconstitutional, and they annul them. The Panamanian government physically seizes both facilities, taking control of the cranes, the vehicles, the computer systems, and the software. C.K. Hutchinson is told to leave, and when its employees refuse, Panama threatened criminal prosecution. And from that point forward, you had two companies who are Western, one called Maersk, which is a Danish shipping company. They took over Balboa, and another one called MSC, which is a Swiss shipping company. They took over Crystal Ball. Bottom line, now it's firmly out of Beijing's reach. And CK Hutchinson calls it unlawful, and they filed for international arbitration. China has warned Panama they're going to pay a heavy price, but the bottom line is it's done. China spent 25 years building a strategic position at the front and back door of the Western Hemisphere's most critical waterway, and they lost it almost overnight through a Panamanian audit, a Supreme Court ruling, and frankly, a president who just decided that this particular arrangement was over. Which brings me to Greenland. So now it's 2019, and this is actually the first time Trump had floated the idea of buying Greenland. A lot of us forgot about this. And at the time, everybody laughed. They called it a vanity project, a real estate developer's fever dream. Well, no one's laughing anymore, because on January 5th of 2026, Trump sat in the Oval Office and said, "We need Greenland for the safety and the security and the survival of our planet." And of course, he made it clear that he wouldn't rule out military action. Why? Well, Greenland sits on what geologists believe are amongst the largest untapped deposits of rare earth minerals on the planet. I'm going to butcher these names, but the Tanbreez and the Kavenfeld deposits are sitting in the ground on an island we've been paying to defend for decades. Because, by the way, that's the other part of this. We're paying towards Greenland's security through NATO. Well, Denmark sits back, and they allowed Chinese state-owned mining companies to quietly move in. There's a company called Shanghai Resources that has already established a foothold in Greenland's mining sector. So here we are, subsidizing the military defense of an island that was slowly being handed to our biggest strategic rival. And Trump looked at that and decided it was finished. And we all know that he did not ask nicely. He issued an ultimatum, join the family or face the consequences, and he backed it up with money. So in June 2025, the U.S. Export-Import Bank committed $120 million to fund development of the Tanbreez mine, specifically to get those minerals into Western supply chains before Chinese companies could lock up the output through offtake agreements. Essentially, these are contracts that guarantee China first rights to buy whatever comes out of the ground. So that's the mineral play. But Greenland isn't just about what's under the ground. It's also about where Greenland sits on a map. At the northern tip of Greenland sits Patuxent Space Base, which is one of America's most important early warning radar sites. So its radar tracks intercontinental and submarine-launched ballistic missiles that are heading towards North America, and it feeds data directly into the U.S. missile warning network. And as missile defense becomes more automated and AI-driven, that radar infrastructure becomes even more important, which is why controlling Greenland would give Washington far greater freedom to expand and secure that Arctic sensor network. Plus, as the Arctic ice is receding, Greenland becomes the perfect location for the massive data centers that the AI era is going to require, because that cold air provides natural cooling. And then you've got untapped hydroelectric power and a geography that puts this part of Greenland at the center of what could become the fastest shipping routes in the Arctic. So here's the bottom line, okay? Trump is moving to lock down the Arctic high ground militarily and technologically, while simultaneously denying China access to Greenland's massive mineral reserves and securing them for the U.S. All right, guys, if you like this clip and you want to watch the full episode, click here. And if you want more content like this, you can subscribe to the show by clicking here.